What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? It's your boy Goblin, and today we're coming in with a banger of a video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Drop a like if you do, subscribe if you haven't already, and also don't forget to follow me on Twitter, linked in the description below. Or you could just go to Twitter and type in The Goblin with 3 N's on the end. That's TheGoblinn. Hit me on Twitter. I appreciate it in advance. And real quick, before we dive into the video, let's take a moment to talk about our friends at MyBookie. This video is brought to you guys by MyBookie. Now listen, I had my money on the Dolphins money line this week in the Dolphins versus Bengals. However, we all know how that just ended, so I don't know if you want to get some tips from me. Instead, get some tips from some experts or some other people besides myself, and head on over to MyBookie and sign up using code GOBLIN to claim your first deposit bonus. You can get your first deposit matched up to $1,000. So if you deposit $500, they'll give you $500 more to bet with. Just head over to MyBookie and sign up using code GOBLIN today. Big shout out to them. Now let's dive into the video. Now, today's video is an absolute banger, a complete hoot and a holler. This is one that I'm very excited to share with you guys tonight. This happened in late 2019 during my absolute degenerate phase of the Trap House Tales series. At this point in my life, I had just been kicked out of my mom's house. I was living in my first place that I had gotten on my own, which was an absolute shithole of a house. I mean, I could go through all of the things wrong with it, but essentially, to sum it up, if a health inspector came, that shit probably would have gotten condemned. So let's just be grateful that that didn't happen. But either way, to give a little backstory, leading up to this particular day that I'm going to talk about, I had just recently gone up to visit my family for Thanksgiving. If you guys have been watching my channel for a while and watched a lot of my videos, you may remember that around this time in 2019, I actually got a driving on a license suspended charge when I got pulled over and I got my car impounded while I was on my way up to see my family for Thanksgiving. This took place right after I got back. So I made the treacherous drive back. I got my car out of the impound lot with the help of my buddy because I didn't have my license, of course. I drove the car back, doing back roads the whole time to get back home from my family, which was about a 3.5 hour drive, give or take. And now I had just gotten back, which is when this story takes place. So I had just gotten home, and while I was up north for Thanksgiving, I had brought home a few goodies. One of the most notable things I brought over was a plethora of leftovers that my mom gave me. Now, we didn't really actually do much for Thanksgiving. Most of my family was kind of out, and it was a last-minute thing, me coming up for Thanksgiving. So I kind of just swung by to scoop up some leftovers. I was like, hey, no problem. I'll just come swing some, bag them up for me. And my mom did that. So I swung by the day after. I wasn't really able to make it the day of. And then I went home, right? The last stop I made in my hometown before I drove home was picking up the leftovers. Now, another thing that I had also grabbed while I was up north was a little bit of Xanax. Not very many. I didn't have very much money at this point. In fact, most of the money I had on me at this point was going towards my gas to get home. But I grabbed a little bit of Xans, maybe like 10 of these fuckers, just a little treat to hold me over. I also had a small amount of weed on me. This was before the dispensary became a thing, and I kind of had to just suck it up and smoke some garbage mid, or I had to go to my hometown, which was 3 hours away, to find my decent plugs. In my new town, I didn't have any plugs for this kind of stuff yet. I had dabbled, I had tried to find some, but I didn't really have anyone that I considered consistent enough or had good enough stuff to, buy from them over my other options. So I had a little bit of a loadout to bring home with me. I cruise on home through the back roads and I get back home, and now I'm chilling back at the crib. I realized since I was gone for a few days that I have absolutely nothing to eat in my house. But that's okay. I have some leftovers, So I get home, I'm chilling out, and I decided to smoke a little bit of this weed, I was kind of fiending. I hadn't really smoked much on this particular day. So once I got back to the crib, I busted out some wraps that I had, and I rolled myself up a blunt. Now, I still hadn't emptied the trunk out yet. I had a lot of my clothes in there, a lot of my belongings, and I had just gotten myself a new car. I use the term new very loosely because the car is significantly older than I am. However, I had gotten my hands on some wheels finally. I had I don't remember what what year it exactly was. It was a 1980-something Volvo 240. I used to know it off top, but honestly, I haven't touched this car in so long, I couldn't even tell you. If any of you guys know, drop a comment. I know some of you Goblin historians definitely know which car this was, or what year this was, but either way, I had a nice, mid-1980s Volvo 240. It was white, it wasn't the wagon, it was the sedan, and I got a great deal on it. I paid I think it was $1,400 if I remember correctly, and it was in pretty okay shape. It had some issues with the engine and some cosmetic issues, but when you're paying that price for a car and it still works, you can't really ask for much more. I mean, it made a 3-hour road trip there and back. What more could I ask for out of a $1,400 car? So I loved this little thing, but after I smoked the blunt and chilled out for a little bit, I decided to pop a couple of my bars, and this is where shit hit the fan. You see, I popped 2 of these little shits. I don't know why I decided to pop 2 right off the bat, but I popped 2. So now, I mean, we're in a full swing here. We're going balls to the wall. I had not really had an opportunity to get fucked up like this off anything but alcohol in a little while, Alcohol was really the only thing I could afford. Luckily, I had met a couple people in my area that were of age. At this point, I was still 20, so I couldn't buy myself alcohol yet. And also, there was a couple sketchy gas stations that didn't really card me. So I was going through a pretty hard alcoholic phase at this point. In fact, at this point in my life, I was even still smoking cigarettes, which is kind of crazy to think about. But either way, I popped a couple of these bars, and now I'm just chilling out. Now, normally me leaving my Thanksgiving leftovers in the trunk for this long would have been a problem, but you have to remember that this is the end of November and it's Illinois, which means that it is pretty much a freezer in my trunk. So obviously, this food was going to be completely fine. I'm chilling out, the bars are starting to hit, maybe 45 minutes or so goes by, and I'm barred out of my fucking mind. Now, I decide that I'm pretty hungry. I don't really have the money to order myself anything. All the money I had on me at this point was in cash. I don't know exactly how much money I had at this point, but I know for a fact it couldn't have been more than like $100. I was really down bad at this point in my life. I had just bought my new car. I was still paying my rent, but at this point all on my own because my other 2 roommates moved out and ditched me. I mean, it was kind of rough out there for your boy, I was really struggling. So I decided that it was time to bust out the good old leftovers. I go out to my car and I try to bust open my trunk, and this is a very old car. It's not like I have an electric thing to pop the trunk. No, you put the key in that bitch and you lift the trunk up. So that's exactly what I did, and lo and behold, the trunk didn't open. Now, this had happened to me before. I'd only had the car for maybe a couple weeks, but even, the girl who I bought it from kind of warned me about this thing happening. She's like, oh yeah, just smack it a couple times, it'll open. That's the only advice I ever got. So, I probably should have thought about that before putting all my shit in the trunk instead of the back, but either way, I was like, fuck it, we're going for it. Now, I am now aware that this car has the ability to lower the back seat, which allows you to get in there. However, there's 2 things that cause me to not do that. One, I'm barred out of my fucking mind, all right? I am not thinking logically. I'm not a problem solver off the Xans. I'm not sitting here dissecting the issue at hand. No, I'm like a brute. I'm like a caveman when you get a bar or 2 in me. It is, the most direct, just straightforward option. I'm taking that shit. So obviously in my head, I'm not sitting there like, yo, maybe I should go through the back seat to get in the trunk. In my head, I'm thinking, I'm hungry. Let's pry the fucking trunk open. So I start looking around in my house. I go back inside and I'm looking around. My car's sitting out front. And at this point, the sun's down. It's getting late out. So I'm like, yo, I'm starving, dog. I mean, I got to get some food here soon. We got to get this trunk open. So I'm looking around, right? I'm looking around my house for anything to get the trunk open. Maybe like a crowbar or something. But knowing me, I don't own any of that shit. There are 3 things that I'm spending money on at this point in my life, all right? Marijuana, food, and my fucking internet bill. That is the only shit, and well, I guess my rent, but that's the only shit that I'm spending money on at this point in my life, right? So obviously, I was not going to have a toolkit in my home. I don't even think I owned a screwdriver at this point. I probably would have had to go ask one of my tweaker neighbors, But either way, I'm looking around, and I can't find shit. I mean, I'm looking everywhere, and finally, Finally, I find something that might help. I find a hammer. Now, this shit was not mine. I found it upstairs in the crawl space in the loft area. I'm pretty sure this belonged to the landlord and he just left it there, but I didn't give a fuck. I found what I needed, so I take this hammer, I'm barred out of my mind, and I go back outside, and now I'm looking at the trunk, and I'm trying to find an angle to maybe get the hammer up in there and just pry it open or something. I had never once considered to Google this issue. That did not ever cross my mind. Nope. I got a hammer, and I got the objective in front of me. We're going for this shit. You know, looking back at it, I'm pretty sure I even brought home like a gram of Coke with me too, if not a little more. I mean, I spent all the money that I had around Thanksgiving time just going for the re-up and staining the leftovers from my mom. So I don't know why I didn't just go home and do the blow like a respectable young man. I don't know why I decided to go degen on the Xanax. But either way, we're totally fucking off topic here. I don't know, man. I'm pretty stoned. Let's get back to it. So I've got this hammer in my hand, and I'm standing outside of my house just looking at the trunk, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. I realized pretty quickly after a couple attempts of trying to get that little back end of the hammer under there that I'm not going to get any leverage here. The way the trunk of my car was shaped just wasn't really working with me here, you know? I kept trying and trying, but I just couldn't find a good access point to get myself wedged into. And then, for some reason, it dawned on me. What if I just go through the taillight? You see, I already had a fucked up taillight at this point. It was already out. That's why I got pulled over about a week prior and got my driving on a suspended charge. They pulled me over because my taillight was out. So I felt like I just had an absolute 300 IQ big brain moment. I'm like, yo, what if I just fucking pry off my taillight to get to the Thanksgiving leftovers? In my head at the time, this sounded brilliant. Honestly, I couldn't think of a better plan. I'm like, yo, this is genius, dude. I mean, let's just go for it. So I go to the taillight that was fucked up, right? Now, honestly, this thing wasn't even all the way out. It was just kind of, I think it was the bulb, honestly. I mean, it was just very dim to the point where, like, yeah, you wouldn't really call it on unless you were, like, 5 feet away from it, you know? And then you're like, oh, yeah. Like, if you're about to fucking rear end me, you'll be like, oh, yeah, his taillight's on. Never mind. And then you'll hit me and kill me, you know? But either way, I'm a man of opportunity, and I see the opportunity presented to me with this taillight. Now, the shapes of the Volvo 240 taillights, they're very boxy, and they have this little like rubber almost like seal around them connecting them to the car. They kind of stick out a little bit. In newer cars, the taillights are just built in. They're smooth, you know? You can run your hand over a body of a car and go over a taillight and it won't even really be a bump in a lot of cars, you know? But in the 240, this thing's just a giant fucking rectangle, and every piece of it is also a fucking rectangle. So this was perfect. All I had to do was get my hammer under there and just kind of pry out the rubber and I'm in, you know, just yank it out. Now, I did not once consider trying to save this taillight. I thought to myself, you know what? Fuck it. I don't care. So I start prying my goddamn taillight out with a hammer. I just go to town on it. Now, mind you, it is fucking probably the day after Thanksgiving at this point. It is dark out, right? And I am outside of my house prying my taillight off with a hammer. What would you think if you looked out your window and saw some barred out fucking tweaker prying off a taillight? In the neighborhood I lived in at this point, that was probably a fairly normal occurrence. But anywhere else, you'd probably call the police. But like I said, in my neighborhood at this point, it wasn't so sought after to live here, so I don't think anyone really cared that much. But I'm going at my taillight. I can't get it at first. I'm getting frustrated. Eventually, I just smash that shit with the hammer. I just go for it. I figure, you know what? I'm going to destroy it when I take it off anyways. So I just fucking go for it. I destroy this shit. I go ape shit on my taillight. I'm prying. I'm smashing. I'm pulling. At one point, I put my hands in my hoodie and I tried to pull it off with my bare hands, but I realized it was a dumb idea and stopped pretty quickly, you know? I was going ape shit, and finally, before I knew it, the taillight was pretty much off. Now, the taillight on this car is giant. It is fucking huge. You can fit your whole arm all the way up to your shoulder in the spot where the taillight is if you remove it. It's not some tiny little thing. So once I got this taillight fucked up and as removed as I could get it, I could see straight into the trunk, and I'm starting to get some hope here. Now, there's two problems with this once I get access to the trunk. Now, first off, The main issue here is that I only have access to one side of the trunk. Right? I have pried off only one side taillight, and my arms are not fucking long enough to get in there and reach everything. The second problem is that the latch for this trunk is in a place that I couldn't quite reach. So I'm just kind of like, fuck it, man. I'm just going to stick my arm in there and go for it. So I start feeling around, and the only things I had in the trunk was I had some bags full of clothes. You see, I still had some stuff to move down from my mom's house to my new place. So I had also brought home a fair amount of clothes just in garbage bags. So my trunk was fairly full, and somewhere in the middle of that was Thanksgiving leftovers. The problem is these leftovers were in multiple bags. They weren't in one bag, so it's not like I could just find the bag and get all my leftovers. No, I had to go one thing at a time and fight for my goddamn right. So I'm feeling around in there. I grab a bag. I realize it's a garbage bag and I leave it. I figure there's no way that this is going to fit through. I'm only here for the stuffing and the goddamn cranberry sauce, all right? And the green bean casserole. I keep feeling around. And finally, I lay my hands on a Ziploc bag. Now, I yank this bad boy out, and luckily, this was a beautiful hit. This was a fantastic hit. I yanked this out, and this was the bag that had not only the cranberry sauce, but it also had the stuffing in it. It was little plastic bags inside of a bigger one, you know? Like a multi-bag kind of situation. So, don't think I'm mixing these two things together like a fucking barbarian, all right? It's two smaller Ziplocs in a bigger Ziploc, all right? But either way, I finally find a Ziploc. I start pulling it out. Now, what I didn't quite account for was even this bag was still slightly too large to get out of the hole that I had created. My arm fit in there, but that was really about it. Luckily, everything in this bag was squishy, so I could kind of mold it like Play-Doh and just slide it out. So I'm in there kind of just squeezing it with my one hand, trying to get in there, you know, mush it down, kind of morph it into the shape I need to pull it out. And eventually, I'm just like, fuck it. I'm not doing this slow anymore. I'm barred out. I'm hungry. We're going for it. So I just yank that shit out. Now, the bag does rip. The bag rips very badly. We had a little bit of cranberry sauce spillage, but it was only on one side, so I just cradled my precious bag like a little baby and walked it inside of my house. Now, at this point, I'm not going to lie, I was pretty tired. I didn't really want to go loot my own trunk anymore and scavenge like a fucking pillager. I kind of just wanted to eat. But I'm looking, and I realized that the stuffing and the cranberry sauce just didn't sound like enough, you know? I needed another component to that plate. So I go back out to my car, and I'm reaching around in my trunk for what felt like fucking forever, and I couldn't reach anything else that felt like a Ziploc bag. I had much later found out that of course I couldn't, because most of the Ziploc bags had gotten buried under the garbage bags of clothes while I was driving around. So, I mean, there was no hope there to begin with. But I went back outside, I reached around a little bit, and finally I was like, fuck it, dude. We're just going to work with what we got. So I go back inside. At this point, I had spent so long working on this shit that I needed another bar. Of course, the logical thing to do. It had only been like maybe a couple hours since my first couple dose, right? My first 2-bar dose. I was like, yo, I'm just going to take another. Fuck it. At least for me, after I get to a certain phase of barred out, it's like I don't notice how fucked up I am on them, you know? When I take 1 bar, I definitely notice the difference if I take another one, right? I will feel that extra bar very hard. But once I get to the 2 to 3 range, anything beyond that is just complete fucking madness. Another thing I'd like to point out is these were school buses. These were not ladders. I probably should have mentioned that earlier in the video, but whatever. You win, you lose. Sometimes you fuck up. What do you want from me? I'm not perfect, but either way. So I go back inside and I pop another one of these bad boys, and now it's time to feast. Now, I had no working gas line in this house, so my stove was out of the question. My microwave and this little hot plate, this little like heated tray that I had, were the only 2 options that I had to cook anything in this house. I didn't even own an air fryer at this point. We were broke, boys. I had like the $20 microwave from Walmart and this little hot plate that was also like $20. It wasn't necessarily like a hot plate. It was more like a big tray, like this heated tray. I mean, you could cook a full meal on it, like every part of the meal. It was just kind of a piece of shit, and it got questionably hot sometimes. So I start looking through my house and trying to find some shit to make. And listen, I have made some horrendous things while barred out, but honestly, this might take the cake for one of the worst ones that just an atrocity was committed here. So I'm looking around my house, and obviously I didn't have bread, all right? I'm not rich. I had no fucking money at the time, but what I did have was a lot of tortillas. You see, I had this strategy. I didn't have enough money at the time to get a lot of ingredients, to make nice things, like make tacos for myself or make a sandwich. So sometimes this is really ghetto. Like, this is some real struggle shit. But sometimes what I would do is I would take the enchilada soups, like the Campbell's ones, and I would drain out the liquid from them and use the fillings, the chunky part, and just make a taco out of it. I just throw the tortilla on my hot plate. I'd kind of try to, quote unquote, cook the drained ingredients a little bit on the hot plate, and then I'd put it together with some scuffed fake cheese, and that was my meal. So I kind of had a similar idea going into this one. I was like, okay, I could try to make a Thanksgiving sandwich kind of thing. This will work great. I had stocked up on many cans of soup because soup is dirt cheap and you can always find it on sale, all right? I had gone to the goddamn Dollar Tree and just balled the fuck out. So I had a whole lot of soup at this point. Now, I'm looking around in my cabinets. I've got my tortillas. I've got my stuffing. I've got my cranberry sauce. And I'm looking around trying to see if I have any other meats. I found some bacon, but I figured that wouldn't really be good with it, and it was also borderline expired. It was looking a little questionable, so I skipped out on that. I found two things that I figured could be fitting to add, which honestly, I don't really know why I thought this was a better idea than the bacon, but I had these little breakfast sausages that were not quite expired yet, and I also found myself one of those chunky chicken noodle soups from Campbell's. So I'm in my head and I'm like, yo, I could just drain the chicken noodle soup and I could take the chicken and the carrots and it would be like the turkey from Thanksgiving. And then I put the sausage on this shit and we're golden, baby. That's the idea I had in my head. And it sounded fantastic at the time. I'm like, look at that. I'm an innovator. I'm a chef. So of course, I go upstairs to my loft, my bedroom area, and I get my hot plate going. Now, the reason that I went upstairs and I didn't do it in my kitchen is because my house also didn't have working heat at this point. So it was the end of November in Illinois and I have no working heat. It would get so cold sometimes that in my house the thermostat would dip below 40. There was numerous days where the thermostat was so low that it didn't display a temperature. It just said low. I only had two things to heat my house. I had this radiator that you could plug into the wall, and then I had my hot plate, which generated a fuckload of heat. So whenever it was cold, I would take it up to my room and cook up there because I could just plug it into any old fucking outlet. So I go up to my struggle room. I'm sitting upstairs. I plug in my hot plate to the wall. I've got all my ingredients with me. I've got a couple extra paper bowls. I've got a paper plate to do everything right. And I'm like, yo, it's fucking go time. Now, I plug in this hot plate, and while I'm letting it heat up a little bit and generate some heat for me, I try to roll up a blunt. I got the blunt, but my fingers are pretty cold at this point. It's pretty chilly in my house right now. So I kind of just chill out for a minute. I felt almost like a homeless person. I was putting my hands over the hot plate trying to warm them up. I mean, it was fucked. I kind of was borderline homeless at this point, honestly. I mean, I could barely even afford the house I was living in. But either way, I had my hands over the hot plate trying to warm them up, and finally I got nice and toasty and started rolling up a blunt. Now, I twisted up this blunt as quick as I could, and I sparked it, and I started going to town chefing up. I had the cranberry sauce in this little bowl on the side. I had the stuffing poured out into this bowl on the side. I had my tortillas sitting there on a plate. I had everything I needed. I had my soup, and obviously, I didn't have an actual strainer. I couldn't drain my soup like the normal way. Nah, dude. I just put my hand over that shit and let the liquid pour through my fingers and then go wash my hands when I was done. Listen, we were poor, motherfucker, okay? We didn't have it like that quite yet. So, either way, I'm sitting there making these absolutely scuffed, quote-unquote Thanksgiving taco. I don't really know what to call them. Like, a Thanksgiving taco is the best thing to put. But then you have the chicken noodle soup and the sausage component. And it's in a fucking tortilla. So, I mean, I don't know. This monstrosity was being prepared. I'm chefing up. I'm putting a little sear on the stuffing. You know, I'm sitting here thinking I'm a beast. I got the tortillas getting a nice little coloring on them. You know, they're getting that extra crispiness on the outside. You put a little butter on them. I had margarine. We didn't have butter money. And you're fucking golden, you know? So I'm making this struggle meal. I put all the pieces together, and in the end, I have these 3 giant, absolutely massive stuffing, cranberry, sausage, chicken, and carrot tacos. Now, I've made some awful things in my life. In fact, I think I made a video talking about a monstrosity of a grilled cheese sandwich I made one time when I was barred out. Some of you may remember that. I think I did make that video. If not, that's a story for the future, but I'm pretty sure I told that one. But this stands out to me as honestly probably the most disgusting food I've ever made while fucked up in my life. There's certain tiers of fucked up food, right? You got your stoned food where it's like, okay, I'll eat something a little questionable. You got your drunk food where it's like, all right, I'll eat something really fucked. And then you have your bar-tard food. Bar-tard food is a whole nother level because with drunk food, it's like it still has to taste good. Same with stoned food. With barred out food, it just all goes out the window because anything tastes better than the Xanax you just ate. So it's just all rules are off when it comes to barred out cooking. So I make these monstrosity tacos and I destroy them. I can't lie. I mean, I had a blast eating these things. I fucked them up. I felt fantastic until after I finished eating, I passed the fuck out and I woke up the next morning and practically shit myself. It wasn't very good, but you know, nevertheless, we persevered and we got those leftovers out of the trunk and made ourselves an exquisite 5-star Michelin star bar-tard meal. A truly exquisite one. But either way, I just felt like sharing this story with you guys. You know, the Thanksgiving season is coming in a couple months. I don't know. I'm kind of hyped for it. Figured I'd share this story. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Drop a like if you did. Thank you guys for tuning in. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter, linked in the description below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out, gamers.